So we are talking today, guys, about communication. This is probably, for the three of us on here, one of our favorite things to talk about ever. You guys agree?
It's my favorite thing.
Hey, it's what I study. I study it, literally study, train, coach on this weekly, every week. So
I love
absolutely.
It. All right. So if you are new to this webinar, this is the Emotional Gymnastics for Real Estate Agents series, which I told Brian Curtis that name and he giggled, right? Not like giggled like a schoolgirl, but giggled like it's a funny name. It's meant to be a funny name. But we focus on the side of real estate that isn't brought up a lot in other webinars, the interpersonal dynamics, the emotional side, emotional intelligence, EQ versus IQ. But today we're diving into the communication piece. And I guarantee we could talk for hours, but we're going to keep it to a more reasonable amount. What do you think? And I'll ask Jim or Brian, whoever wants to start this. If you were going to start off a discussion on communication, where do you think the best place is to start, or where do you think is it someplace that agents most kind of like overlook when looking at communication?
Jim, you go first.
Okay. Well, the thing that I find most fascinating about communication is that it literally incorporates your entire life. So the way that you communicate to the world is who you are to other people, everyone around you. So it is literally the thing that the world perceives you as. And so it's not like when people think of communication, they think of how you're communicating to people. But if you break that down, it's broken into parts, right? It's verbal communication, it's nonverbal communication, it's your mannerisms, it's the way in which you talk, how you present yourself. I am perceived by you by the way that I am interacting with the world. And that is all encompassing into the entire discussion of communication. So where to start with that, I have no idea.
well, I have some ideas. That's fine. I mean, that was a good frame up. You said, yeah. Brian, you do?
I do, absolutely. So here's where I start for everybody: rapport. Because I feel like, we could teach you, I don't know, I probably know 25 to 30 different techniques. I know closes, I know objection handlers. I can do all of that stuff, and none of it's worth a flip if you don't know, like, and trust me. So at the end of the day, to me, every conversation should start out with, am I in rapport? Am I not in rapport? How many times have you been with somebody, things are going really well, and all of a sudden it starts to go sideways? And so the thing I'm always looking for is, why did I fall out of rapport? Am I not mirroring and matching them physically? Am I not mirroring and matching them with tone, rate, volume? Those are all the things that we try and look at. And literally in classes that I teach, step one, none of the rest of this stuff matters if we're not going to be in rapport. So that's the starting point for me.
I love it. And I've got questions there. And I probably should now introduce you guys in case people, I'm kind of going, we're doing Memento style. I wanted to start with some actual content. We'll kind of work this in. So we've got the host here with me today. We've got Brian Curtis with Creative Coaching and Consulting. I'm reading off the bottom of your screen. I love it. But Brian's been a coach for years. Brian has coached some of the top teams in this country. He runs some of a couple top real estate teams in this country as well. But I know we'll talk about later. I know you're going deep into the world of communication soon. That's Brian's background. And Jim Godwin has been a successful real estate team leader and agent in Kansas City for many years, but is also just obsessed with human dynamics and communication. So here's my question for you on rapport, Brian. Do you train people to feel when they are out of rapport, or to intellectually recognize if they're out of rapport? What's the best way to start?
Well, I'm a feel guy. So, people have there's three different learning styles as a whole, right? So you've probably heard this: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, VAC. So I'm an extremely kinesthetic person. So understand who you are. So if you're a very visual person, pay attention visually. If you're auditory, if that's your learning style or your, communication style, then pay attention to it from an auditory. But ultimately for me, you can just kind of tell, you and I are having a great conversation. All of a sudden we're going to one word answers. Well, that's a pretty good key. Or, there's lots of other things, and we can go into, body language and different things. Here's a fun body language thing that most people do. Most people think body language, the higher you're up on the body, the more it's telling you. It's actually the exact opposite. If you're actually ever with somebody and you watch their feet start to point towards the door, you're in trouble. And that's a true thing. And it happens on a level that you cannot control as a human being unless you're someone like us who has studied that and goes, oh crap, I'm pointing towards the door, I'm gonna, but it's amazing, all these little tricks and trades that you can do. And to me, it's not about a trick. It's like, oh, this is a key to me to say, hey, Jesse and I are no longer communicating. And why? Well, because he's got to be someplace in 5 minutes and I'm talking my head off and I won't shut up. Or he's sick and tired of listening to what I've got to say and he wants to go. But, we don't necessarily know why, but we can take these cues and then, be a person who takes cues, I think is a really important thing.
I got a question for you, Brian. When do you teach that when you recognize that you're falling out of rapport with somebody, you're in a conversation, at a listing appointment or whatever, things are going really great, something you said shifts the energy and you can tell something has changed. Do you teach to address that right away by actually bringing it up and saying, I see that something may have shifted, and figure out what exactly it is to get it out of the way?
My first initial response is when I fall out of rapport with somebody and it's obvious, is to immediately try and mirror match them physically. It's the easiest, simplest, quickest way to get back in rapport with somebody. Now, if I said a gigantic faux pas, and we all know we've all done that, anybody who's been to more than one listing appointment has said something dumb. In that case, I might come back to that and say, hey, I said this and this and this. It feels like that may have made you uncomfortable. Can you share with me what's going on? Because I want to make sure that I didn't miscommunicate with you.
Yeah.
Is that what you do also, Jim?
Yeah, that's what I do. I'm just interested to hear how what Brian's thought was on that, because it seems to work really well, but it's also something that I can see being challenging for a lot of people to be able to confront that in a situation where you're already nervous about the interaction to begin with. And the thought of having to confront and face something like that probably seems daunting for a lot of people.
So here's something I learned, and I'll give a shout out to the guy who taught it to me, a guy named Joel Rico. I think Jesse's met him. I don't know if you know him or not, Jim. But once upon a time, I took a class from Joel, and he said this, and I've repeated it no less than 500 times. In a new relationship, someone is going to be uncomfortable. Volunteer to be the person who's uncomfortable. And think about that. You're the agent. You're the person who's trying to say, I want to help you. You're the person who's trying to sell somebody something. You're the person who's trying to convince somebody of something. Make them comfortable. If they're comfortable, your job just got 10 times easier. If you're not a person who's comfortable doing X, whatever X is, suck it up. I mean, I hate to be that way, but at the end of the day, let that other person feel comfortable. Let that other person be the person who goes, you know what? I feel good around Brian.
To me, that's exactly what service is. And that's the business that we're in.
Absolutely.
So I have a question for you guys in terms of be the one who's, I love that quote, be the one who's willing to be uncomfortable. My wife was giving me a hard time the other day, and I'll tell you why. You guys will appreciate this. So apparently when I talk to people who communicate differently in the world, I tend to match their communication styles a lot. So a guy came over to our house who was washing our windows. I'm in San Diego, so he was like surfer dude, kind of cool, right? Like cool guy. And apparently I started talking to him in a different way than I would. And my wife was like giggling at me from the other room and not like making fun of me. She just think it's so funny. So was I being authentic, inauthentic? I didn't even know I was doing it, but what do you guys think about that?
It was completely subconscious.
I had no idea I was doing it. I mean, I do it all the time apparently, but she said, yeah, you were just talking like cool to the guy. Cause he was like, cool.
Gnarly and dude.
Yeah. Like, I don't know why the guy who washes my windows is cool, but apparently he's cool. In my brain, I thought that. So I started talking in that way. Do you guys do that? Does it happen naturally? Is it ingrained in me? And should I stop?
So this is what I would say to you, Jesse. So as long as you're not you're being offensive, and I know you pretty well. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're probably not going to be offensive. But if someone has a different accent, I won't identify any specific accent, but if somebody has a different accent and all of a sudden you start talking in that accent, believe it or not, that's actually a technique that's taught and it can work. But I will say this, unless you're an absolute expert at it, don't do it. Why? Because if I start talking in accent X, and clearly I'm a white dude, I mean, we can see that, we can see who Brian is, and all of a sudden I start talking in an Asian accent, if you don't know how to do that, you don't know how to be subtle about that, you're going to insult somebody. But at the same time, it's just mirror and matching. So I feel like you just kind of mirrored and matched that guy, and that's probably from all the training and all the sales skills that you have and learned over the years. You're like, this guy, I can be like him, and it's not offensive to be like him, but understand that there's a line. I don't know where it is, but unless you're extremely skilled, stay away from the line. It's really what I'm saying.
Well, that's why I wanted to bring it up. And I feel like this is a very safe example because I don't think there's any surfers out there that were going to be offended by me talking like a surfer bro, right? Like I surf. I'm like, I don't think that that's why it was a safe space to share this in this vulnerable way. Like, it's kind of silly, this thing that I do naturally, but yes, I think that's really good for people to know. Stay away from the line. Jim, you want to jump in?
And it's good. It's good that that your wife pointed that out, because if it's something that you weren't recognizing, it's good to know how you're interacting with people. Because Brian's right. There could be a time where you're doing it automatically, and it can be something that's offensive to somebody.
Yeah, and the reason I do it, and this is just to the emotional side of it, is because I want to be liked. Like I'm someone who I want this guy. I want the random stranger who shows at my house to wash windows to like me. But that's important to know because your clients might be wired the same way. Or if you're wired that way as a real estate salesperson and you go engage with buyers or sellers in a certain way and you have that wiring, it's important to acknowledge about yourself.
Yes. And again, I think you're safe there. That's a relatively safe space. But, especially in 2020, as we move forward, we need to be sensitive to a lot of different things that are going on out there that maybe 20 years ago, we probably should have been sensitive to when we weren't. So, to me, I'm going to err on the safe side. Because I don't want to offend anyone, not just from a sales perspective, because I don't want to make anyone feel bad. And I know neither of you guys do either. So,
Brian, have you ever had somebody ask you why you're matching what they're doing?
No, I've never gotten caught.
Really?
No. So, if you're talking about body language, I can't really see what you guys are doing right now. I mean, if you started mirroring my body language, I'd probably catch it, not because I'm good at it, but because I move my hands so much that it's very blatant. And I can't even say a word without moving my hands. Put me on my hands and my mouth will close. But it's not quite that extreme. But most people aren't doing that. Most people are doing this, sit up in your chair, maybe put your hand here, or, sometimes people will cross their arms. I mean, there's all kinds of different things. A lot of people do this. This is called a steeple for all you people, for all your body language experts. That basically means that the things that you're saying, if the person's steepling around you, they believe you. So just a kind of a one.
So you want to see this in?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I do it all the time, and it's going to kind of become something I pay attention to. But yes, it's steepling. So
I love it. I love it. My favorite one in a listing appointment, and because I think it's fun, is the crossing the arms. If you're talking with a seller who's crossing their arms, I always cross my arms, and my goal is to get them to uncross their arms. I don't think anyone will ever catch you doing that, because at that point when they're so in their own world, if you're communicating with someone who has crossed their arms, they're closing off. They're not paying attention to what you're doing. They're in their own space.
I think that's a really, really good point, Jesse, for people to know, is that when you're mirroring and matching people, they are so involved in their own thing that's going on in their head, analyzing you, wondering if you're there to hurt them, if you're there to help them. They're there to figure out if you are actually going to do what you're saying that you're doing. So they're the chances of them actually thinking that you're mirroring and matching them is slim to none.
Right. There's going to be the 5% or 3%, I don't know, who have had the training, who may know. But then they also have to pay attention. So there's a combination of you have to understand that, and it's really not that common. I mean, we see it a lot in sales, and so we think everybody knows. But it's kind of like when we use all these acronyms in real estate and assume other people know what those mean. I was in the military, and it was the worst. We would have significant others come and sit with us, a bunch of military guys I was hanging out with, and they would go, "I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Everything's an acronym, and I don't know what any of them mean. Stop it." But we get in these modes. So, unless you're someone who's been trained in it, and then studies it, you're not going to catch it.
And speaking of acronyms for a minute in communication, let's say your goal is to help your clients feel comfortable. Can we agree at a baseline that's our goal, is to help our clients' defensive walls come down and have them feel comfortable for the most part? Brian looks skeptical. Oh, he froze. That's why.
Brian froze and I have no idea what you said.
I said, can we agree at a baseline that our goal is to have our clients feel comfortable, right? Our goal is to bring their defensive wall down and have them feel comfortable. Okay. So at a baseline, if that's what it is, other than removing acronyms, which is, as a real estate agent, not only acronyms, but removing some of the jargon and complicated words that we use in speaking in plain language. Well, let's talk about some of the other things you can do, but let's even talk about that. When you're teaching this, Brian or Jim, do you go out of your way to make sure that agents speak in plain English?
I'll bring it up, and I'd often say, don't stop saying, here's a perfect example that people say all the time. They say FSBO. So FSBO is not a term that, believe it or not, the public is familiar with. They would know for sale by owner, but if you walk around saying FSBO this, FSBO that, or you call somebody up and say, hey, you're a FSBO, don't do that. First of all, they're not a FSBO. They're a person. They're a person who's doing a for sale by owner. But, I've heard that before. Hey, you're selling your house FSBO. Well, what the hell are you talking about? I'm selling my house FSBO. So I tell people to stay away from it, but I don't know that I necessarily go into it in depth. And maybe we should. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And is there anything that people should avoid when you're talking about trying to make clients feel comfortable in communication?
Yeah. Avoid talking.
Tell me more.
Just talk as least amount as possible. Most people think that when they're on a listing appointment, you're being interviewed. It's the opposite. You're interviewing the client. So the more that you can ask questions and dig deeper into those questions and ask questions on the answers that you got, and keep the client talking about themselves and their life and their family and the house and the history of the place. And is the more that they dig up about their personal history and their life and their family, the more comfortable they will naturally become.
I agree 100% with that. At the end of the day, the person who's talking the most is losing. I'm sure both of you guys have read How to Win Friends and Influence People. And, that book is old. But guess what? Human being behavior hasn't changed that much in the last time. I mean, I think it was written in like 1929. I'm not exaggerating. It's old. Yeah. But, Dale Carnegie talks about he goes to a party. He walks around the room and asks people questions. Doesn't tell anybody anything about himself. Hey, Jesse, tell me what you do for a living. Hey, Bob, do that. He just goes and asks questions. And days later, he gets letters in the mail because, it's 1929. People wrote letters. And those letters say, wow, you were such a great communicator. We really appreciated the conversation that we had. The guy didn't say anything outside of he learned the number one rule. Everyone's favorite person in the world is themselves. So, people don't care. There's that corny saying, I don't care what you know until I know that you care. Get to know people, and it's huge.
At a baseline, all people want is to be heard and understood. Mm-hmm. And so if people feel like you hear them and understand them and actually are listening to what they're saying, that's uncommon in the world today. So You're doing something that 98% of the population does not do, which is ask a question, listen to the answer, and actually take it in and have that person feel like you understand.
Let me ask you this, Jim. What are some of the other things you do to make sure that people are hearing you? Because I agree with you 100%. Like, most people aren't even heard by their significant others. That's how bad it is in the world today. So, what are some of the things? I've got some ideas. I'd just love to hear maybe some of the stuff that you're saying to make sure that people know that you're listening and understanding where they're coming from.
Well, the first thing is repeating what they said. That is the absolute number one best thing that you can do for somebody. Is when they give you you ask them a question, they give you an answer, and you paraphrase and pick out the important parts of it and repeat it back to them. That is the absolute number one thing that you can do.
Right. And I agree with that. So if I say to you, Jim, I really want to sell my house in the next 30 days and I don't want to have 150, I want 10 people at the max to come in, I might say something like that as a seller in this market, right? Yeah. So, what would you say back to that?
Brian, just so I understand you correctly, what's really important to you is that you sell your house quickly and that not a whole lot of people come through the house, because I'm sure that during the pandemic, you just are uncomfortable with people coming through. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely that's what's important to me. Thanks. And that's so important that, and here's what we don't want to do. You don't want to repeat the exact words back to that person. That feels like you're just some kind of robot.
That's fair.
Yeah, Jim tweaked it just enough to know that it's in his own voice and not just in mine. So yeah, that's and the other thing I like to do is acknowledge and confirm. And what I mean by that, I love to have phrases like, Jim says something, I say, great, Jim, da 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 da, or perfect, or absolutely, or something like that. So I'm giving them, when you say those type of words, you're affirming that they're saying something good. And everyone wants a little pat on the back. You don't think about it that way, but everybody wants that little pat on the back.
Yeah. And non-verbally in that conversation, leaning forward when they're speaking, making eye contact, nodding, agreeing, saying, wow, if I start nodding, everyone nods.
Yep.
So doing, nonverbal communication is just as important in that conversation when you're asking questions, leaning forward, making sure that they see that you're listening and understanding.
So I can say from being on the client side or the buying side from any process, if you've been with a salesperson, even if they're doing that, it still feels good when you're heard, right? I've had people do it to me. I'm like, I know exactly what they're doing, but like, I felt really good. Like, yeah, that's it. You totally heard me.
All we want to do is feel heard.
Right. So on the flip side, if you guys can identify, because as I'm listening to you, I'm trying to figure out, you've talked to salespeople who are repeating back, but like when you just said, great, Jim, blah, 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 but you've had people do it. And there's something inauthentic about the way some people do it that reads so the energy of it just doesn't feel right. Can you put your finger on, is it that they haven't practiced it? They're thinking about themselves. What do you think it is if someone does this, but it goes wrong?
I would say, go ahead, Jim.
Sorry. Speaking really fast is one thing that bothers me. Like when somebody's talking, it's like a going through the motion type thing. If somebody's talking very quickly, or looking down or have a pen in their hand, and they're just like talking and doing something with a pen at the same time, that disconnects the connection, because then you are in sales again. Then you're just asking a question to get a response and not asking a question to hear the answer. There's a big difference there.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And if we want to talk about rate, because I think I've mentioned that a couple of times, here's a fun thing to do. So Jim said, when someone talks to me quickly, what would you say in general? If someone's talking too quickly, how would you describe how you feel about that person?
They just want to get the job done. Okay. They're not really caring about like exactly what my needs are. They just want to get the sale complete and the check signed so they can move on to the next client.
Yeah, and oftentimes that's what we hear. They're insensitive. They're focused on themselves. You also hear this. They're a slick salesperson trying to pull something over on me. So, and just for fun, what's the opposite? If I talk really slow, how do you feel about me?
That you may not know what you're doing.
Not that bright.
You're dumb.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's literally what it is. Now, I want everyone to understand it's not relative. It's relative to the person you're talking to. Right. So if someone talks really fast to me, that doesn't bother me because I talk really fast all the time too. And guess what? They're part of my tribe. And I'm obviously sped that up for a reason. But, I lived in the South for 20 years. I'm not from the South. And so I literally had to be very conscious. People in the South, as a rule, and I don't want to stereotype, but as a rule, a general rule of thumb, a heuristic, if you will, they talk slower than people in the North. So that's okay. I had to learn that if I was going to talk really quick like this, I wasn't going to last very long. Someone gets on the phone and goes, hello, and I'm not going to go, hey, brother, blah, 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 blah. I'm not part of their tribe. And I love the idea of I want to be in the same tribe with these people. So, it's simple. If you don't take anything else away from this, talk at the same rate as somebody else. That in and of itself makes them do it. And it happens on a subconscious level. Like no one was walking around going, I really like Brian because he talked the same speed as me. That's not what's happening. This is happening at a subconscious level.
Yeah.
But they can think about it consciously when it's not the same. Yeah, if you're the opposite, man, Brian talks so fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is the kind of responses that you get, that you hear a lot from people. Like I hear this a lot. I don't know why, but I really feel like I connected with Jim. Right? And Brian, you probably get that all the time. I know, Jesse, you do. Right? So that's what happens. People don't understand why that is the way that it is. but because you are connecting, they feel it. People see it and they feel it.
And I believe that starts with actually genuinely caring. And I know that sounds like a really
100%.
stupid thing to say,
No.
but most of us aren't good enough actors to not care and try and pretend like we care. So here's an idea, just care, and that doesn't mean that you're not going to run into people that you don't like, but you still care about them. Here's a trick I learned 20 years ago in sales. Everybody says this, I want people to like me. That's a good sales technique. If I can get people to like me, that's good for them. I want you to flip it on its head. It's easier. Find something that you like about them and focus on it. Because if you're focusing on something that you like about somebody else, you know what? They're going to like you. Why? Because you like this thing about them. Maybe they have a bumper sticker on their car for a certain, organization, and you like that organization. Or, I honk for dogs. Okay, I like dogs. Let's talk about dogs. Let me just say this. Don't make stuff up. That's the mistake that people make. Like, I've never owned a dog in my life, and I kick anyone I walk by. I'm not going to pretend. I don't, by the way. I'm not going to pretend that I like dogs because it's going to be inauthentic. But I do like dogs. I love dogs. So if somebody's got a dog sticker on their car, I'll say, tell me about that, and be genuinely interested in it, because now I can like this person because they like dogs. I might hate everything else about them, but I can focus on the fact that they like dogs. So it's a simple little trick.
And the cool thing is that you don't even have to like dogs. You just have to like asking the question about it.
Sure.
Right? Because if you genuinely care about the response, it's not even really about what they're talking about. It's the act of being genuine and communicating in an authentic way. That actually can be very addicting. Like when this type of thing comes as a challenge for people, and they say, I'm going to try it on and see what happens. And they have a conversation, and it ends up being that somebody connects with them. They get hooked on it. They get hooked on it because it feels good to be authentic with somebody and have them feel that.
I've never thought of it that way. It's absolutely good point. Interesting. We got a little more in the webinar, but I did want to ask, because Brian, I know you'd mentioned to me before, you're teaching a 12-week course on this, right? Like, you're going deep in communication.
Cool.
I am. And, some of the stuff that we've talked about today is kind of like the precursor, the first step. The first class, we talk about building rapport. We talk about making sure that you can mirror and match people, both with tone, with volume, with, and we haven't talked about that. But, if you get on the phone and you're talking to somebody and they're talking like this, don't yell at that person because they feel like you're yelling at them. So, understanding who that person is, and that's step one. And then, we're going to go through the entire length of stuff, and it's NLP and also NLC being neuro-linguistic communication, NLP being neuro-linguistic programming. Sorry, my tongue got in the way there. But, it's about, here's the thing. There's a ton of great salespeople in this country who don't know why they're great salespeople. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. We've all met them, right? You meet that guy and you're like, man, that guy is a great salesperson. He can sell ice to the Eskimos. Well, great. Why can't he do that? Well, because he naturally does some of the stuff that you can learn to do. It's kind of like leadership. A lot of people say, oh, that person's a good leader or a bad leader. I believe we all have a leadership ceiling, but we can all learn to be better. And it's the same with communication. We all have a communication ceiling. There's going to, just like, we'll use a sports analogy. Michael Jordan had a bigger ceiling than I do playing basketball. There's no doubt about that. No one's going to argue that, but it doesn't mean I couldn't get better at basketball if I wanted. So the same thing with communication, we have the opportunity to learn and grow, and there's a ceiling, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say most of us have never come close to it.
Michael Jordan also got cut from his high school basketball team the first time he tried out. So,
yep.
So there might be people watching this in terms of communication that if this is your first exposure, you're like, I don't do any of this. Cool. Dive in. It's all about natural, where you started from. Natural talent, Brian, is I think the other way I look at that. I never thought of the ceiling idea, but you're right. Like, you and I, no matter how many times we go practice, we're not going to learn to dunk a ball like Jordan. It's just not going to happen.
Ain't happening.
So, no.
All right. So I think this is a good place. I want to ask about receiver orientation versus transmitter orientation in the context of communication. This is a concept that I picked up on, and I don't think he created it. It came from somewhere else, but I learned about it in the Malcolm Gladwell book. I want to think Outliers Tip. I don't remember which book it was. One of Malcolm Gladwell's books. He talks about different societies have different orientations for communication. Receiver versus transmitter. In one group, right, transmitter, the importance is on the person doing the speaking to make sure that that the person they're speaking to understands it. In receiver, it's the opposite. The people who are receiving the information, it's their job to ask questions to make sure they've done it. So in American culture, we are typically a transmitter orientation where the person talking, it's the responsibility is on them to make sure that the people they're talking to get it, which is why you'll talk to people, your clients, and you'll say something and you'll be like, that was amazing. And your clients will be like, I have no idea what they said. They're not going to ask you a question about it. Mm-hmm. How do you guys address this? What do you do? Have you ever thought through this concept before? You've probably read about it in Gladwell's books, I imagine, but how do you address this for you guys?
Jim?
I need to think about this one.
Okay, I'll go then. So for me, it's about asking questions. I'll tell a very quick story. Listing presentations, we mentioned that a couple times. So I can remember sitting in a listing presentation, I'm kicking ass. I'm getting everything done. Everyone's, I'm showing all the great stuff I'm going to do. And at the end, I stole this from Ben Kinney. He said, you should ask this question. By the way, is there anything another agent mentioned to you that I forgot to mention when it comes to marketing? And basically what you're saying is, did somebody else tell you they were going to do something so I could say, yes, I'll do that too? But that's not what happened. The guy looks at me square in the face, and I'm not patting myself on the back here, but the reality is at this time, I was one of the few people, this is 6-7 years ago, doing Facebook marketing. I was one of the few people doing Craigslist. I was doing more marketing than almost anybody else in my market. And the guy looks me square at the eye, goes, nope, it sounds exactly like everybody else. And I went, oh my God, this guy didn't hear a word I said. So one of the things that I started adding to my listing presentation, I use slides and I used a flip book, basically flip books through slides. I've got a tie down. And if you guys don't know what a tie down is, basically it's just a question of agreement that I ask on almost every single one of my slides. So this is why you should work with the team, blah, 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 blah. By the way, do you think it's a better idea to work with a team or work with an individual agent? Or, hey, this is what I do with Facebook. By the way, can you see how Facebook ads could help get your house sold quicker? And if you don't ask questions along the way, there's a real good chance that they're having a different conversation over here in their head. They're thinking about their kids and, I got to get dinner and I got to do all this stuff. So you have to engage people. And one of my favorite sayings is telling isn't selling. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Jesse, but that's kind of where I go.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's where I figured we'd go into. So yeah, you said telling isn't selling.
Yeah. Questions and stories. The two biggest ways to connect.
Absolutely.
I heard something on a call the other day, and I think this applies to it wasn't even a real estate call, but I think it applies to real estate. Have you ever heard this one, Brian? Knowledge on ice is nothing compared to ignorance on fire.
Okay.
But this relates to the whole telling isn't selling. You might be the most experienced real estate agent, and if you come in and you're on the buyer side, how the consultation or whatever you're talking about, if you're breaking it down technically, but very just calm, and here's all the information, you could come in and know almost nothing, but be excited about it and just be like, this is what we're going to do to get your home sold. And that's all they're going to hear. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole ignorance on fire. Yes, you need to know what you're doing and you need to have some knowledge, but I thought that was a really interesting visual. I'd never heard that saying said quite that way before.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, Jesse, too, because I would say in my experience, 9 out of 10 people couldn't care one bit about all the things that I do. They don't care about any of it. They don't, they want some knowledge that you are going to do what you say that you're going to do, and you can sell their house. But I find that the less I go into all of the things that I do, the better off it is, because I'm connecting with them instead of, like Brian said, telling, and that seems to work much better.
Was it you, Brian, that told me the story about the other agent who talked about the lockbox? Was that you that just told me that story?
No, I don't know that one.
Oh, I was on some webinar, and I forget who told me the story. They had gotten, sometimes it is important to talk about some of the things, by the way, those of you watching that you do that you think are really basic. Every time they went on a listing appointment and they didn't get it, they would call the person up and say, just want to say congratulations, I'm excited for you. Just want to know who, the person you selected, so I can know what I can do different for the future. How did you end up selecting the realtor? Just a real basic, like, congratulations, to get some market research. And the seller they were talking to, said, well, this other agent came by and they've got this little box that you put the key inside. And so, and the person's like, Lockbox, right? And there were just a couple basic things that this other realtor had walked this person through. They got excited about because of the way they communicated about it. They were excited. They said, look how cool this thing is. And this person who told me this story, again, I forget who told me this, and killing me, but they said, yeah, obviously I use a lockbox, but I didn't even think to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So I actually have that in my presentation that we're going to have a lockbox. What I say is, by the way, this is the lockbox we put on the front door, and it's all about safety. No one can get in here. As a matter of fact, you can't even get in here. So it's about safety. And so, because here's the thing I think people miss. Jim was kind of alluding to this. I don't care that Brian Curtis has been involved in 3,000 real estate transactions. Actually, when I hear that, when I go, well, maybe he'll give me a discount because he made so much money. By the way, I didn't make that much money. But, it's one of those things. So, we've got brag slides, and I've got them, and the purpose of them is for credibility if somebody asks. But 99 out of 100 times, I don't say we've closed this many transactions, we're the number X team, I'm this, I'm that. No one gives a rip. As I often say, that and $4 will buy my coffee at Starbucks tomorrow morning. It really does not matter. And nobody cares about how many houses that you sold. How do I know that? Because I've sold more houses than the majority of the people in my market, and I didn't get every listing appointment. Like, somebody goes in there, think about this. How many times have you been sitting in a room and a guy who's got, sold 2 houses beat you out in a listing appointment? I'm like, how is that even possible? Well, it wasn't because I sold more houses, because I did. It was because they built better rapport. It wasn't because they're doing better marketing. They're not. They did a better job of communicating and connecting with that person than I did. Plain and simple.
That's all it is. That's all it is. And there's other little things too that we can talk about, little tips and tricks that you can do inside of communication that are extremely helpful, especially with listing presentations and working with new clients. Like simple things like video messaging people. When I started to incorporate when leaving the appointment, within the 15 minutes after I left the appointment, in my car, sending a video text message to the person that I just left, thanking them for allowing me to be in their home, and reiterating some of the things very quickly that we talked about that were important to them, immediately business started picking up.
Great tip. And it works for 2 reasons. First of all, it shows you cares. And second of all, Jim's the only one doing it. Right? Sometimes, and this is going to sound crazy, sometimes being different is enough. Mm-hmm. Because if I talk to 10 agents, and by the way, in 2021, it's not unreasonable that someone's talked to 10 agents, probably not on the list side, but on the buy side, they might have talked to 25 agents. At the end of the day, nobody said this: I'm not going to communicate with you. I'm not going to call you back. I'll show up when I want, and I'll do some work for you. No, that's no one saying. Everyone says, I'm great, I'm the greatest, I'm this and that. You've got to find a way to differentiate yourself. And a video text is next level simple, but next level different.
Here's another one that is so simple and easy, but no one ever does. Ask the client how they want to be communicated. It's so easy. People want to be communicated with in different ways. Some people only want text messages. Some people only want phone calls. Some people only want email. Really find out what their preferred method of communication is and only stick with that.
I'll add another question. Here's one of my favorite questions. I'm going to share one of my biggest, what I call secrets. And I really do believe this. You guys are going to go, well, that's the simplest thing I ever heard, but it works. And so anyone watching this, I promise this, the next cold lead that you get, use this one very simple script and it'll put you ahead of everybody else. By the way, what are you looking for in an agent? That question right there, I'll tell the quickest story about it. We started doing that about 4 years ago. And the day after I taught that in one of my classes, one of the agents on my team went and on the phone said, hey, by the way, what are you looking for in an agent? And the lady on the phone, this was her exact answer: I have no idea, but I'm going to work with you. You're the only person who bothered to ask.
Yep.
Write it down. Write it down. By the way, what are you looking for in an agent? So we only have a couple minutes left, but now you guys have me. I'm talking video messaging and text. How many of these things have changed? So since you and I started studying sales, Brian, before the invention of the mobile phone, right? How much of this has changed now that some clients only communicate via text message? How much can you still retain versus not use? How much does it still come up into play?
So a couple of things, and this is me, my friend Robbie T would disagree with this, but that's always fun to disagree with some people. So My idea is the purpose of a text message is to end up getting on the phone, or the purpose of the text message is to end up getting in person. It's if I rack and stack communication, it goes in person, Zoom, phone call, text message, email. That's kind of, carrier pigeon or whatever after that. But ultimately, it's about, for me, getting in front of somebody and being able to have a communication with them. That being said, a lot of the techniques that we teach can be used in a text message as well. So, an email as well. There's no reason, and we haven't talked about it, but pacing and leading is a technique that I teach. You can pace and lead somebody in an email. You can pace and lead somebody in a text message. So it's just understanding you can't do an embedded command in a text message because, that'd be insane. You'd be all of a sudden in the middle of a sentence, have big capital letters. They'd think you're a wacko. But there's most of this stuff can actually translate to written text as well.
Mm-hmm. You can repeat and affirm, right, Jim? Like in a text message.
You can repeat and affirm. And I try my very best to keep text messages to information.
Me too.
Even when somebody says my preferred method of text is communication, or method of communication is text, I say to them, fine, that's great. We can do that. If there's a level of communication that it needs to be deeper than a text message, I'm still going to call you because I believe that I'm not serving you properly if I'm just texting you things that are more important than a text message.
I think you've earned that level of trust though at that point. Even if you have I like to use millennials because they're as a set, the people that they always say are like the ones who only text. And I have millennial clients that really do text, just, they will never call me. They'll always just text. But as we're texting back and forth, when we hit that point in the conversation, talking about an offer or a counter offer or a strategy, I'm always going to go to the phone call. And I think because you've earned that level of trust that they will pick up the phone and talk to you. Even the clients that you say, they never talk to me, they only text. Yeah, but when there's something important, they will talk to you if you've earned that level of trust.
Yeah. And sometimes you got to get them a reason. Hey, Jesse, I'm happy to keep texting. It might be a lot more efficient and effective for us to have a quick phone call because, there's so much that we have to text back and forth. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. You can give them a reason to do it. And here's the thing I want everyone to think about when it comes to text. And I love what Jim said. You can use it for information things like I'm going to text my wife, headed home. I'm going to pick up dinner. What would you like for dinner? Those are things that make sense. We're not going to have a discussion about, our future plans to, move to another country over text message. We don't have any of those plans, but you understand what I'm saying. There's certain things that are informational, but here's an interesting thing. And this is one of the things that I've really loved. Someone said this to me a while ago is we are not logical creatures who have emotions. We are emotional creatures who sometimes use logic. So 100%. Text messages have no emotion, or if they do, sometimes they invoke emotions, and it's the absolutely wrong emotion. This wasn't the one we intended to. Every single person who's honest has sent a text message to their significant other and pissed them off, and walked in the house and went, "Why are you mad at me? I was just, you said this and this and this. No, I didn't." And you go back and read it and go, "Oh, I completely understand where you're coming from there." So. Here's an interesting thing. That's why emojis work so well. That's why gift messages work so well, because they're communicating an emotion. And again, we're emotional creatures. We like the emotion. We like to feel. Some of us even like to feel bad. We all like to feel something, though. And so, understanding that as you're communicating with people is very, very important.
Yeah, and also understanding that you have zero control over the way someone receives a message. So like if I'm texting somebody that's and saying there were no showings today, somebody may receive that as there were no showings today. There's something wrong. And so like that's why texting can be difficult because you have no idea what state of mind that person is as they're reading the message and what happened to them that day. And the intent could be completely different than what you intended.
Yes.
So, I love talking about communication. All right, guys, I'm gonna wrap this up here. So if there's any last thoughts you want to leave people with, any final things, let me know. But we could talk about this topic for hours and hours. And Brian Curtis, appreciate you being here. Jim Gowan, this is fun, guys.
Yeah, appreciate the invite.
Yeah. Any last thoughts you want to wrap up on the communication before we wrap this up?
Just try it on. Try it on. Yeah, if it's something that you're not used to or don't feel like you're good at or nervous to do, try it and see what happens. I think you'll end up really liking it.
And I agree with that, Jim. At the end of the day, and this is something I've said for years, there's only two ways to do better in this business. You can either talk to a lot more people, and everyone I've talked to says, I don't want to make any more calls. I don't want to lead generate anymore. Or the other choice is to do better with the people you're already talking to. And that's what studying communication's about. It's about finding a way to be persuasive in people's best interest. Let me say that. I don't want to convince somebody to do something they don't want to do, but I do want to show them what makes the most sense because we're the experts, right? And hopefully, we do that with ethics and with a good intent. And if we do that with ethically and good intent, we're going to help people get where they want to go, and it'll be easier for them and it'll be easier for us.
Isn't that the difference between persuasion and manipulation, right? They're very similar. The difference is persuasion is because you have their best intent in mind. Manipulation is when you're trying to bring them someplace that's probably not good for them.
You're getting them out of their own way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a coach years ago who told me salespeople make the world go round. Nothing in this world happens without a salesperson. I believe that. I think it's a noble thing that even though a lot of people watching this who are real estate agents probably don't self-define as a salesperson because they may not feel comfortable with it, which I think is funny. But we're all salespeople. If you're in real estate, you're in sales.
Own it.
Own it. Yeah. Embrace it. All right, guys, this is fun. Thank you for being here. Happy Friday. Enjoy your weekend. Bye, guys. Produced by the Agent Collective Media Network.